myself. Okay, you're good now.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. It's only human nature to wonder about the things that go bump in the night. But what about ghostly orbs, apparitions, frogs raining from the sky, giants underground, haunted cemeteries, haunted houses, haunted buildings? That's what we're going to be talking about here at the Joliet Public Library. I'm Mary Beth Gannon, local historian, and I have chronicled here many people's stories of paranormal and or supernatural occurrences that have happened over the years in our area. Now, some of these places may still be haunted. Maybe they no longer are. Maybe it was a one-time experience. I am here to share their stories and a few of my own. Here we go. Oakwood Cemetery. This is one of our oldest cemeteries here and is long associated with hauntings. It's on Cass Street. And prior to it becoming a cemetery for our pioneer settlers, it was also the site of a Native people's burial ground. The mound there is in the back, if you drive all the way in the back. And local lore states that in 1769, the Illinois tribe, for whom Illinois is named, murdered Pontiac, war chief of the Ottawa. In retribution, the Ottawa, their allies, the Potawatomi, and some accounts of other tribes attacked the Illini and drove them up the rock to Starve Rock, eventually starving them. What a lot of people might not know is part of this battle started here in Joliet by where the EJ&E Railroad is. And the people who were buried in the mound are said to be women and children who died in that particular battle. So here we go. And here's the mound directly in back of Oakwood, as I mentioned. It stands about 4 feet high, but was said to be originally about twice that height. And one of the things that might go along with this particular spot being haunted is that this particular mound was disturbed in the 1920s. It was excavated by anthropologists from the University of Chicago. They unearthed 23 skeletons, mostly women and children. And it's believed that some of the artifacts there were taken and possibly not returned. Hopefully they will be. Halloween. Now here's an article from Joliet Spectator here, talking about origins of Halloween, or Samhain with its Celtic roots here, coming right before All Saints Day, people getting ready for the harvest. And certainly Will County had its share of Celtic settlers from Scotland and Ireland. And in the origin of the pumpkin, of course, is from those areas where the Celts would carve faces on gourds. 1897, airship from another world. Long before the Wright brothers were flying planes, there were reports across America of an airship from another world flying across the country. And part of the spot where it flew was Joliet. It was also spotted in Kankakee and Orland Park. And the sightings here in Joliet of this, quote, airship from another world occurred right before a famous UFO incident in Aurora, Texas, which happened April 17th, 1897, when, according to locals, a UFO, wasn't called UFO then, it was airship, crashed on a farm in Aurora, Texas. And supposedly the ship, which was rather small in size, had an occupant, and the pilot was, quote, not of this world and was said to be an alien. The locals buried him in a cemetery in town in Aurora, Texas, and later on somebody stole his grave. But the fact that it ties into the Joliet incident is very interesting, and you'll see that pattern of UFOs being spotted in one part of the country, and also being spotted in the Joliet area, either shortly before or shortly after. And this one, not a particular haunting, but I found it interesting. This is Anne Odelia Dis DeBar. Harry Houdini, in his Magician Among the Spirits of 1924, described her as, quote, one of the most extraordinary fake mediums and mystery swindlers the world has ever known. She was convicted of fraud in 1888 in New York, and she served 6 months. In 1893, she was sentenced here to Joliet for fraud, according to the New York Times. She had numerous aliases and also had a title of Swami. And here's the famous Monkey Hill Cemetery. That I believe this is the only known photo of it. And this was the early cemetery where inmates from Joliet Correctional were buried. In 1932, the cemetery garnered national attention when an alleged ghost was reportedly giving a nightly singing performance. Now, this spot was already the subject of multiple haunting stories, with sightings of a ghostly soldier in uniform, as well as a supposed white mist floating among the headstones. For about a month, the singing could be heard, but it was in a strange language. Crowds soon began gathering, hoping to catch a glimpse of the ghost. Thousands gathered. But it came to an end when prison officials said the singing came from an inmate, an alive inmate, that is. Speaking of the prison, here we are talking about Odette Allen. She's probably one of the best known alleged ghosts associated with Joliet Correctional. Odette was the wife of the prison warden. She was murdered in 1915. It is said that her ghost still haunts the area. A man named Chicken Joe Campbell was blamed for the crime, but there were lots of doubts that he actually did it. Okay, just outside of Joliet is Dollinger Farm over in Minooka. It's supposedly a little haunted spot. The barn here, it was built about the time of the I&M Canal development, just before or about that time. You may want to go to the farm during the day, though, because it's a great pumpkin farm with many family-friendly activities. The farm is also very close to a cemetery that is also reportedly haunted. Speaking of haunted cemeteries, Aux Sable in Minooka is said to be one of the most haunted cemeteries in the entire state. Orbs, strange mists, and a female ghost who reportedly likes to play pranks have been reported by many visitors to the cemetery. Might not be somewhere you want to go after dark. Slyx McDonald. This beautiful old home in Lockport originally belonged to Slyx McDonald. It is said from an early age, he scorned organized religion, and he was far more interested in the magical and the metaphysical. His first published work, Vital Philosophy, a survey of substance and an exposition of natural religion, reflected on the influence of transcendentalism and Swedenborgian teachings. This was published in 1870. Eventually, he became a leading member in the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light. Now, this was a secret fraternal organization based on the writings of Neoplatonist Hermes Trismegistus. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. McDonald wrote 3 volumes entitled Hermetic Philosophy. They were published in 1890, 1891, and 1893 under the pseudonym of Slyx. He corresponded with a wide circle of occultists from North America, Europe, and Asia. And one of his fellow members of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light was a major influence on occultist legend Aleister Crowley. And of course, Crowley being an influence on Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin. McDonald's group reportedly performed rituals in nearby wooded areas of Lockport. And here's one of the most beautiful homes in Joliet, but also supposedly is a bit haunted. This is the Jacob Henry Mansion, of course, on Eastern Avenue in Joliet in our National Historic District. And according to my friend, Winnie Stromberg, she's almost 100 now, and she grew up in this neighborhood. And she said that all the locals would call this a haunted house. People were definitely afraid to go in it. They're certainly not afraid to go in it today. It's a site of beautiful parties, weddings, and various events. Okay, built in 1882, this is the Hiram B. Stutt Mansion. Mr. Stutt was a Civil War veteran, and he was also Joliet's first barbed wire manufacturer. This home is on the National Register of Historic Places and also the site of probably many, many hauntings. My late friend Seth McGoskey lived here, and he was also a friend of my late mother's. And I remember my mom trying to talk him out of buying it, but he really loved the house and wanted to live in it. And I just remember saying, it's haunted, please don't go there. And very sad. Rumor has it that 2 children died in this home. Also 3 of the owners. There was a shooting just outside this home in 2006. And when Seth died, the house went up for sale again, and it was advertised as haunted, and it drew national attention and was purchased by someone out of state. Many paranormal investigators have been to this home and done investigative work here. It's also been featured on television. People have sensed cold spots here. Some of them have heard voices. There's also been lights and orbs, many, many events. I have not been in it since the house changed hands, so I'm not sure if that's still occurring, but definitely occurred for a very long period of time. The drapes you see on the left were original curtains that hung inside the home. I bought those a long time ago, and I now use them in my house. Here's another reputed haunted home in Joliet. This is the Frank Shaver Allen home on Morgan in the St. Pat's neighborhood. He was a local architect, and he was also an Egyptologist. He built many private homes in town and public buildings. He also built outside of this area. He enjoyed using local limestone, and particularly like working in the Richardson Romanesque style. Some of the homes he built included the Patrick Haley Mansion, also another haunted spot in town, supposedly. Joliet Township High School, the A.J. Bates home at 500 Western, and the Cracker Mansion on Hickory. The haunted activities at this home really heated up in the 1970s when the Magoski family was living here. Reporters and psychics investigated the property, and the family had said, the owners at the time had said that they were terrorized by some of this activity. Some of the ghosts there were supposedly of an elderly woman, also a young boy, supposedly. There's been several incidents there saying that the young boy ghost would invite him to be a playmate of one of the people living there. Some of the other incidents at the home, paranormal incidents at the home, included doors slamming, shadowy figures, screams, and unknown voices. An interesting thing about it is that supposedly F.S. Allen haunts his home he had moved to in California after he left Joliet. And speaking of F.S. Allen, we're now at 500 Western Avenue at the corner of Nicholson and Western. This is the Campbell Bates home. And it was built by F.S. Allen, as I said. And the lady on the right is my great grandmother, Eliza Dolan Murphy. She was the original maid for this home. And I grew up hearing stories that the home was haunted. And so naturally, it piqued my curiosity when it came up for sale about a dozen or so years ago. And I went through it with my late mother, and she just said, we can't live here. You know, it's haunted. And supposedly there were some illegal activities happening in the back of the home at the time in the 70s, which maybe made the home reportedly haunted. The home was later bought by a friend of mine who tried to fix it up, and he was later killed in an accident. And he had always said the house was haunted as well. So as we're on Western Avenue, this is my former home. This is also in the 500 block of Western Avenue. And during my time at the home, I did not sense anything, but one of my children would often talk about the ghost lady in his bedroom, and she would come and visit him every night. I threw a party at the home one year, and I had several people tell me about a cold spot on my back steps, and also about a ghost upstairs, which happened to be my youngest son's bedroom with the ghost lady. When I tried to sell the house, there were also people who went through it and said it was haunted. Now, as we go further west on Western, this is my current home. This is 903 Western, and this is the Loughran McFarland Mansion, which at one time took up an entire city block. The whole property did, with the city's first swimming pool, and it had a 3-hole golf course and an orchard and a working farm. And over the years, there've been everyone who's lived in this house, every family who's lived there has told me they've experienced ghostly issues, whether it was unknown footsteps or actually seeing shadowy figures in the home. My oldest son has seen a woman in a wheelchair going around the house, and I have a photo of that woman. Also, right before we bought the house, when it was for sale, it was in foreclosure. A friend of mine who lives nearby, and I don't have the photo, but she did show it to me. She took photos of the house on a lark for a friend of hers, and she happened to zoom in on the front of the house, the 3 little windows at the top, and she saw there were 2 shadowy women in there, and you could even see the buttons on their blouses. They were ghosts. You couldn't see their face, but you could see their clothing in very fine detail. Also, I heard from a woman who grew up in this neighborhood, and during the late 1950s, she would talk about seeing fairies on the ground, and they would tell her where to hide in the yard whenever somebody was coming by so that nobody would see her. Moving on. This is the old Conway home, and this is along Rainer Avenue near Buell. And Mr. Conway was involved with many property ventures, and he lived here with his family. And when the children died, I believe the contents and possibly the house too were left to a local church. When the house came up for sale, I talked to some people who said they didn't buy it because it was haunted. I don't know if that's still true for the people who live there now, but at the time that it was for sale, they had some issues, and the people who bought it the first time it came up for sale supposedly had the same thing. Not sure about the current owners. Now, here's one of my favorite stories. I found this quite by accident, looking for other things while I was here at Joliet Public Library, looking at the microphone. And this is talk of a giant skeleton that was found in the early 1900s near Morris. And the skeleton was more than 7 feet tall. It was found on the Hogue farm by men who were hauling gravel away from a pit. The skeleton was buried about 4 feet below the surface. The skeleton was in a seated position with hands folded across the lap. The bones are those of a, quote, giant. The arm bones were more than twice the average length, and the thigh bones were 4 inches longer than normal. And the ribs were said to be as large as those of a young horse. Now, some of the theories at the time were that this was a native person's burial, but it was a giant. And if you do a little bit digging, you'll see reports of giant skeletons being found across America, in Kentucky and Ohio, and also, I believe, in the southern part of our state. And these skeletons tend to disappear. Supposedly, Smithsonian has possession of some of them, but it's not known if anybody's allowed to look at them. So definitely a mystery that's worth investigating some more. And here is a picture of the Hogue farm, just to give some context. I believe the house sold a few years ago, so this picture's a few years old. And here's a little bit more of the Hogue farm, and wondering maybe the skeleton was found around here. And I guess the thing that stands out in my mind is, was this the only skeleton, or were there more and they just haven't been found yet? All right. And Strange Lights of 1913. And here's a headline for it. Joliet people attracted by strange phenomena in the eastern sky last night, and many believed it was a comet or some other heavenly body responsible for the unusual appearance of the sky. Andrew Wagner of First National Bank said he had noted the bright blaze in the sky, but ventured to say that it was not a star or comet. So there's some that say that maybe it was something from outer space, or maybe just something else, atmospheric conditions, as FM Mulig is saying. Who knows? Okay, and here we are, 1947. Now, this made the top fold of the front page of the Joliet Herald News in 1947. And this headline was found, this headline here, this particular story happened just 2 weeks before the infamous alleged incident of a UFO, an alleged UFO found in Roswell, New Mexico. Like I told you in the beginning with the 1897 sighting, here we are again with a UFO or potential UFO being spotted here, and then crash landing or being spotted somewhere else, back to back. So in 1947, Kenneth Arnold was flying a small plane on the West Coast when he spotted unidentified objects flying at least 1,200 miles per hour. About an hour later, Charles Kestel, an engineer at the EG&E Railroad here in Joliet, spotted 9 unidentified flying objects in Joliet going north to south. Kestel said the lead object controlled the others because it moved us in a certain way, and that those behind it would follow suit in unison. He said he did not think much of the incident, but he did tell his wife at the time. Arnold, who we talked about before, the pilot was on the West Coast, estimated the flying object's speed by watching how long it took them to cross a known distance. An Army rocket expert said the objects that Arnold saw could have been jet planes, but astronomers near Seattle and Joliet said there was no natural explanation for the reports. Arnold told reporters that the things were shaped like boomerangs and skipped along much like a tossed saucer might skip across a pond, hence the term flying saucers. But here we are here in Joliet with 9 large discs flying in a zigzag pattern in a tremendous speed across the sky right here in Joliet, 2 weeks before Roswell. And here we are, 1952, flying saucers? No, just a plane, or so they say. Police were ready to get out the skyhooks last night to determine what the objects were hovering over the northeast section of Joliet. But before the officers went to that trouble, they checked with Joliet Weather Bureau and the CAA offices at Municipal Airport to see if they knew any reports of bright lights moving across our sky. Yes, the Weather Bureau had received the inquiries, but they're just saying that it was bright lights and landing lights from a slow moving plane. There are those who doubt that. And before we talk about the Rialto, I should also mention in 1950s, my grandpa Gannon had a friend who lived in Wilmington, and this friend had a car dealership, and he also supposedly reported UFOs flying over that area at that time, hoping to find an article for that. So here's another favorite haunted stop in Joliet, the Rialto Square Theater, one of the most reportedly haunted spots for our area. For the record, I personally did not experience anything when I was a board member for a few years at the Rialto, but there are plenty of other people who have had very unusual experiences at the theater. A ghost nicknamed Vivian has been felt in the dressing room, her presence. Some people speculate she may be the ghost of a deceased performer from the theater. Some of the other residential guest ghosts include a little boy who was hit by a car, and after he was struck by the vehicle, he was reportedly taken inside the Rialto where he died. People have also seen ghosts of a couple in the balcony. The couple had reportedly jumped to their deaths. And from time to time, the Rialto does do haunted tours if you are interested in learning a little bit more about haunted history at the Rialto. But before we get off the topic of the Rialto, I did want to mention Leo Terry. He's also one of the many reported ghosts associated with the Rialto. And Leo Terry was, of course, the organist there. I learned through one of the other more current organists, someone alive, that he's had experiences with someone or something watching him while he practiced, and that he always thought it was Leo. So he makes a point of saying, "Hi, Leo," when he goes into practice on the organ. Now, here's a story many people associate just with Chicago, but this is the Eastland Tragedy of 1915, and it definitely has some Joliet ties. In 1915, the SS Eastland Tragedy claimed Jolietan lives, including those of William Feehan and I believe a few others. 844 people were killed in that wreck. Oprah Winfrey's former Harpo Studios building is allegedly haunted. That's where many of the bodies were taken temporarily after the wreckage, that particular spot. However, before Oprah moved her show to the Harpo building, She used to tape her show at my old workplace, ABC7 at State and Lake, and that building is definitely haunted. I've seen and heard some strange things there in the dead of the night. And not to digress too much, but I used to work overnights there, and a friend of mine wanted me to go upstairs with him to our little cafeteria. He didn't want to go alone in the middle of the night. And I'm like, oh, come on, don't be a big baby. He's like, no, it's haunted. So we took the elevator upstairs. And when we got off the elevator, I said, okay, if this is really haunted here, show yourself. And I laughed really hard. And the next thing I know, the elevators were opening and closing over and over, and the lights were flashing. No joke. We ran so fast to get back to the newsroom. Moving on. The ghost at Mrs. Bannon's. Now, this might not be a real ghost. This might have been just some kids having fun, but Mrs. Bannon had a home on South Chicago Street, and the ghost would throw coal at the front door, the alleged ghost, then throw coal at the side of the house. Windows were broken, and people were hoping to catch the ghost. I think it was mostly pranks, probably from a very much alive person, but it caught my attention because it said the ghost. Mercury witch balls. These are quite rare. These are 19th century Mercury glass witch balls with their original stands. Each ball has a hook on it so it can be hung up by a window. The witch balls are supposed to provide protection against evil spirits. These were found in an old home in Joliet's Cunningham neighborhood during the 1980s, and they're belong to me now. They're in my collection. They were my late mom's. Okay. As promised, Joliet rains frogs. No joke. Here we are. Strange to relate, however, Joliet experienced a real shower of frogs during a storm Saturday afternoon. This was in 1906. The frogs, and there were hundreds of them, fell in the immediate neighborhood of the 3 Points. And for a while, youngsters had lots of fun scooping up the little fellows from the pavement. The frogs were less than an inch in length, having just thrown off their tadpole skins, but they were as lively as possible after their aerial voyage. It's believed that they were caught up by a gust of wind and then blown over to the 3 Points neighborhood. Now, here's a more recent incident. Mokina alleged UFO a little more than a year ago. An unidentified flying object was spotted flying over the Terra Hills subdivision. It was said to be flying low at a slow and steady pace. The incident was reported to the National Reporting Center and then to the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON. I bet you were wondering about that first photo at the beginning of my talk. Look at these strange orbs. I have collected antique photographs my whole life, and what you're looking at now are orbs, and these are from a Joliet home near the steel mill. I'm not going to mention the family on this particular one, but very interesting. And I would love to know more about this particular thing and how long it lasted. Okay. Joliet teens spot UFO in 1969. I'm told there is a Herald News article for this one. I'm still checking microfilm for it, but I did talk to one of the people involved in this incident. And in 1969, a group of teenagers who were in charge of planning their prom were on their way home when they spotted a UFO on Black Road near Catherine Street. One of the witnesses said it was not an orb, but it had bright lights going in 2 different directions and that the object was pill-shaped. Witnesses also say it hovered. The teens called police, and as I mentioned, the article was featured the next day. Still trying to catch that. Here's one. Like I said, some of our most popular ones are Rialto and the prison, and certainly at the old Catholic High, Father Kellen Ryan. The old Joliet Catholic High School was the site of a ghost. Reportedly, Father Kellen Ryan, who was born William Ryan in 1939. He earned his undergraduate and graduate degrees in history from St. Bonaventure University, and then was ordained in 1965. In 1966, he came to Joliet Catholic High School to work. Ryan was known as a, quote, happy trickster with a good sense of humor. And part of that sense of humor is one time he supposedly raised the alarm in the middle of the night, claiming a priest was attacked and was in the rectory needing help. But when the friars got to the rectory, there was no injured priest. However, the rectory was decorated for a party. So that was his little gag joke there. On March 5th, 1972, Ryan went to visit his parents in Chicago. The following morning, very early in the morning, he apparently fell asleep while driving back to Joliet. His car went off the road in Lamont. It struck a garage, a tree, and then a telephone pole. The car went up in flames. Unfortunately, 33-year-old Ryan was killed in the crash. The day Ryan died, the jukebox in the cafeteria at the school supposedly went on by itself. It was playing, but no record was on the turntable. Ryan was known to play that jukebox. About 6 months after his death, the person who replaced him as dean at the school supposedly saw Father Ryan's ghost sitting in a rocking chair. The following morning, the new dean noticed a newspaper with Father Ryan's obituary sitting on the floor. There have been several other sightings of Ryan over a long period of time, but the sightings reportedly stopped after the school had closed and became the Victory Center. And here's one I don't have a lot of information on, but it's about the old alchemy shop. Involves a business not far from Six Corners in Joliet. The business was reportedly inside a bungalow home, and a previous occupant of that home has said that French doors inside that house would shake. Sometimes the TV would change channels on its own. There was also an altar found inside an old water closet. All right, I have to use a modern photo for this one too. This is my story. My parents often would take us for pizza at Aurelio's when it was owned by the Semino family and at Mary Crest Shopping Center. In the late 1970s, we were eating there one night when I noticed an old woman sitting by the exit. I heard her say, "Little girl, tell your parents I need a ride home." The only thing was we were too far away for me to have actually heard her say that. And when I looked over at her, her mouth wasn't moving. I did, however, tell my parents that the lady over there wants us to give her a ride home. My mom said, "What lady? There's no one there." It made me really mad at the time because I saw her clearly as I could see my own hands. When it came time to leave, the lady was still sitting there asking for a ride home. I wanted to help her so badly, but I did not want to get yelled at again by my mom. I pointed to her again anyway, and I said, "Please, just give her a ride home." We got outside the restaurant and into the parking lot, and that's when I really got scolded. Suddenly, she was there in the parking lot. At that point, my father definitely saw her. I think he made the sign of a cross and he ran to our car. It took about 20 years later, but my mother finally admitted that she saw the lady too. She just didn't want a child who could see ghosts, and it really upset her. Rockdale lights. This is a story I heard about recently. Around 1957 and 1958, strange lights, some people called it UFOs, flying over Rockdale. And here we are to the crying baby of McDonough Street. This home is in the St. Pat's neighborhood. It belongs to a friend of mine. It's been in her family for many years. The house was built in 1889. A baby crying has reportedly been heard in the home, but no baby actually doing the crying, or at least not an alive one. There was also a man who reportedly hung himself in the home. His ghost sometimes visits the owners, even leaving a dip in the bed when he sits on it, and he's even laid in the middle of the bed. There's also a spot on the steps where you can reportedly feel a cold blast. Another alleged haunting on McDonough here, according to Mark Lang, who lived at the home in the 1970s. He said one night during the summertime in the 70s, they were eating supper when they heard someone come in the front door and run upstairs into his sister's bedroom, slamming a closet door shut. Inside the closet was an opening to the attic. Mark's dad and brother ran up the stairs, but they found nothing. One of the bedrooms in this house supposedly also had a small closet over the stairwell where they would lock the door and it would always be open when you came back into the room. A few years ago, when the house was for sale again, they had pictures of the inside of the house and the door was cracked open again. No word if anything like that's happening now, but as I said before, 1970s when this reportedly happened. Will County Poor Farm. Further west on McDonough is the Will County Poor Farm. It was in service from 1851 to 1955. It provided shelter to Will County's poor, the orphans, mentally ill, and terminally ill residents. People who could work did work. They worked on the farm, whether it was farming, cooking, or other domestic work. And when the people died, they were buried at the cemetery right there. Going on with this one, many people who visited the cemetery have reported strange paranormal haunted experiences there, mists, orbs, strange lights. I have not visited because I believe it's now private property, but many people say it is haunted. All right, and this photo here I got from my friend Randy Wimberly. In the late 1970s, Randy Wimberly would pick up his then girlfriend, who later became his first wife. He would pick her up every night after work. They would go to dinner at his apartment. And one night he was by an apartment complex in Crest Hill when they saw what they thought was a helicopter at first. They were not far from Stateville. And at the time they thought, well, maybe it's an escaped criminal. The couple sat in the car and they watched the light, which kept getting closer and closer. They then realized it was not a helicopter, but it had a huge laser beam of light. There was also a cylindrical dome on top with rotating lights. It got 100 yards from them, but it made no sound. They rolled down their windows just to listen, but there was still no sound coming from it. It then flew very slowly over them, still not making noise. Then suddenly it just shot away. Over by Shanahan, there's been some claims of ghostly-like activity in the past at this motel. Not a lot of details been given, and no word if this was just a one-time occurrence. Okay, along Rowell Avenue is a home that a previous owner claims was haunted. Previous owner says that a ghost would reportedly appear in a child's bedroom and talk to a little girl who lived there. Another child reportedly saw the ghost in the home, and the child was told to get out. Here's a home along Cass Street that was said to be the site of some strange events. A woman who rented the home years ago said that her brother would hear her calling his name, but she wasn't calling him. When she would go in another room, her purse would be moved with the contents laid in a trail. Socks would be piled in various spots around the house. The previous resident also said it felt like they were being watched or as though someone had walked into the room. And again, these are accounts from previous people who've lived there. Okay, we'll skip that one. Okay, Higginbotham Estate in Cherry Hill. Now, this land in Cherry Hill originally belonged to the Potawatomi people. Their leader, Chief Shabana, would visit nearby at Gauger Crossing, and the Potawatomi were known to be friendly Native Americans. And this particular section of Cherry Hill was owned by Harlow Higginbotham. He was born in 1838 to local pioneers. Higginbotham worked in Chicago with Marshall Field. When the Great Chicago Fire hit, Field entrusted Higginbotham with important store papers and documents, which were stored here. Higginbotham later became president of the 1893 Columbian Exposition World's Fair. He had this prestigious mansion built. It was designed in 1895 by famed Chicago architect Daniel Burnham, who also designed our beautiful library here in Joliet. The Higginbotham mansion cost $200,000 to build. It had 35 rooms plus greenhouses, stables, extensive grounds, including Japanese-style bridges and even a lagoon. However, the Higginbotham family did not stay at this house very long. And soon after, local young people would host parties in the home, which the home at that time was still furnished with original furnishings. It was during this time that locals said the home was haunted and that ghostly presences were supposedly felt. The home fell in disrepair and it was eventually demolished. Here we are traveling along South Chicago Street near Interstate 80, the American Institute of Laundering in Joliet. Some visitors have reportedly seen shadowy figures and other paranormal type things at this building. JJC Fine Arts Theater. Here are some interesting ghostly stories from a friend of mine about the Joliet Junior College Fine Arts Theater. She worked there for a long time and saw on multiple occasions a woman dressed in white on the audience side of the theater. She felt the woman in white was probably Native American. The appearance of the woman in white, let me flip a page here, would coincide when students played a Ouija board. The woman in white would walk back and forth in the theater before suddenly disappearing. My friend also said she would hear movement in the theater when she was in the prop shop and vice versa. On another occasion, she watched a glass pitcher move by itself and crash to the ground. However, despite all these incidents, she doesn't believe any of the spirits are violent. Doesn't sound like they were, just maybe a little friendly. Let's go on. Ancient Order of Hibernians Hall. If you are in downtown Joliet on Cass Street toward the viaduct, you will notice this lovely old brick and stone building. This was once home to the Joliet chapter of the Ancient Order of Hibernians. It was a fraternal order for Irish Americans. The organization helped new immigrants, helped local Irish run for politics, and it was a place for Irish singles to properly meet. My great-grandfather was an officer at the AOH. The stone symbols on the outside of the building are a nod to our Celtic heritage. Did you know that this building too is said to be haunted? Upstairs in what they call the ballroom is said to be a ghost who has occupied that spot for a long time. One of the most stately homes in Joliet's Upper Bluff neighborhood is the A.C. Clement Mansion on Campbell Street. Arthur Charles Clement was a prominent businessman in Joliet at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. The mansion later became a senior home, and it was also a funeral home, Blackburn Funeral Home for a time, before it returned again to residential living. Over the years, the ghost of a woman has reportedly been spotted there, as well as the smell of her mystery ghost-like perfume. Lights have been turned on and off. It's also said that the TV has gone on and off on its own, as well as objects unexplainably moving in the house. And here's my last one for you. This one's called The Mannequin Man. This is a very strange tale, potential urban legend here. In the middle of the night along Route 52 between Morris and Shorewood would reportedly appear to be a naked man on the side of the road. A driver reportedly saw him, slowed down to confirm was that really what he was seeing. So the driver slowed down and the naked man waved, and the driver kept going, finding the whole thing rather amusing. But he didn't find it funny for too long. As the driver went further down the road, he suddenly heard a strange knocking sound. It was a knocking on his passenger window. When the driver looked, it was the naked man. Only his facial features were stiff and not moving, like a mannequin, hence the name Mannequin Man. At this point, the driver was scared and he increased his speed, but the knocking continued. Eventually, Mannequin Man disappeared, but not before waving once more. Happy Halloween. Stay safe. We'll be back with more Joliet history soon. I'm Mary Beth Gannon, your host. Thank you, and thank you, Joliet Public Library.